Hi, I'm Rob Tressler, and I'm a nerd. I'm CSO and co-founder of Excelos, a CDMO. The obsession for me has always been starting material quality for adaptive immunotherapies. I'm a simple-minded individual, so I think garbage in, garbage out, and maybe tuning up a little bit the assessment that we do on the starting material in terms of immune potential might help to make a better world for the patient.
And I'm Amy Christensen. I am the medical affairs lead for Beacon Therapeutics. We're an ophthalmology gene therapy company. And I'm passionate about patients and communication of our data.
Hi, I'm Farhatullah Sayed. I'm a senior scientist, head of cell and gene therapy in Riyadh. I'm passionate about cell and gene therapy, and main focus is how we can make this accessible and reduce the price, cost effective for any patients, and point of care manufacturing, designing the cost effective treatments for all kind of cell and gene therapies. That's my focus.
Adrienne Mendoza. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for BBG Advanced Therapies, a division of BioBridge Global. And my focus is on helping create accessibility for these cell therapies and lowering the cost ultimately because more people can access it. Very passionate about this field. Like many of you, have probably lost someone in the past from a disease that could be treatable with these therapies in the future. So that is the number one goal.
And hopefully, last but not least, I'm Abigail Jaystrab, Director of Patient Engagement and Clinical Innovation at Panther Rare. And I am most passionate about patient care and creative clinical program design.
Thanks, everyone, for sharing. I think, the title of this panel, Patient-centric by design, patients at the center, all of this we hear all the time. The patients I work with and represent are kind of sick of being at the center. They want to be along for every step of the ride. One of my favorite advocates that's on our board at the Emily Whitehead Foundation, Sharon King, has a yellow brick road analogy for it. And another person I spoke with last week said it's more of an odyssey than a patient journey. So we're hearing some new terms, but I do love the idea that all of us can design in mind. So what does that mean? Does anybody know? But let's start with Amy. Given her role in the clinical programs that you're leading, where do you start as a developer thinking about the patient on the clinical side?
Sure. I think starting with the end in mind, thinking about the patient as our end, and infusing their perspective throughout the journey. So we are still in clinical development for our ophthalmology gene therapy products. And what we've done is consider the patient voice at the beginning of even designing the trials and having a patient advisory council to inform us what's meaningful to them, but also what are some of the barriers in being involved in clinical trials and how can we overcome those. Learning more about the patient journey, what this therapy would mean to them, and then also start to uncover those educational gaps. What they know about gene therapy, what they're concerned about, what the risks and the benefits are, so that as we are designing our clinical trials and shepherding the patients through that journey, what do we need to do at the end to bring this therapy to them and that they'll want to go through all of the hoops, because it will take a lot. It is a surgical procedure to deliver the gene therapy, and so some things we can't overcome, but what can we do to overcome some of those barriers?
Yeah, thanks. And I think it's an important point there is cell and gene therapies are a different way to deliver. Our mission at the Emily Whitehead Foundation is agnostic to disease, but specific to advanced therapies. So how does that change it? And perhaps Abigail, if you wanted to dig in with your experience on the rare side and how you look at this from engaging with patients, and is it a different level of education needed given the complexity, or what are some of the ways that we can address that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Patients really do deserve hyper-personalized care. They come from all sorts of backgrounds, and I think that's really important to understand that you need to spend time with these patients to understand what their journey was up until that point. With the CGT pipeline heavily focused on rare and orphan diseases, these patients often lived a lifetime of healthcare up until this point. And so when you think about that, they need to have trust in this system, right? You need to rebuild that. They've had misdiagnoses, they've had multiple lab tests. It's just been false starts, failed treatments. It's been quite a journey for a lot of these patients. And so I think it's so important that you give them a personalized education. You have to meet them on their level, because if you don't, what happens is no matter how much education you do, it might be for nothing if you don't take time and really have that transparent communication. So it sounds like it's an inefficiency, right? When you think of business models, you think, oh, well, we need to get as many calls done to speak to as many patients as we can, see as many as we can. So you literally have to build an infrastructure that allows you to be inefficient intentionally, because it ends up reaping the rewards in the long term.
Yeah. I do love that theory. My team and I have been thinking of this infrastructure of compassion we need to build that isn't 100% about efficiency. It's about spending time. And when you talk to folks focused on supporting patients, it could be a 3-hour call with cancer support community and others, and that is not fitting into the metrics nor the private equity-backed healthcare system. So unfortunately, it's hoisted onto nonprofits and innovative for-profit companies.
Right.
And that really limits the access. And sometimes that's just emotional support.
Exactly.
But it's up to all of us to take a piece of that, but we can't all do all of it.
You need to be really careful with the metrics that you're holding people accountable to. If you have a metric that looks at time on a call or time spent with a patient, you need to be aware of that when you're partnering with an organization that focuses on those things that could potentially maybe indirectly lead someone to think that they have to hurry up a call or wrap it up sooner or not spend that additional time with the person. So it's actually better when you are intentional about not including those metrics, and also encouraging people to spend that necessary time to really understand that patient's clinical reality and be able to support them in a way that allows them to actually see success with these therapies.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks for sharing that. There's lots to unpack. But connected at that level, right, there's an education gap for even that these therapies exist. And then even when we approve therapies, there's access issues that we talk about. So perhaps Adrian, we are fresh off of a roundtable and a very great discussion around some components that we can fix for that access piece. So if we're going to spend 3 hours on a call as a nonprofit, what else is going on from other factors of that journey that can help with access while we work on making sure that they even want the therapy?
Yeah, I think it was a great roundtable. And just to give you some takeaways, I think that we've got 3 pillars of access that we have to think about: the place where the therapy is, the knowledge about it, and the affordability of it. And I think they're all interconnected. When we think about the places, obviously there's a very limited academic treatment centers, authorized treatment centers rather, to deliver these therapies in the end, and that place proximity is a huge barrier for patients trying to access these therapies. They may have to travel many hours away, out-of-pocket expenses, care for family members. That may just be unreachable. When it comes to the knowledge about them, there's not only a knowledge constraint in the physician and provider network and how to navigate these therapies, but also a knowledge of the community. Who else has gone through this therapy? How can I access a network of other members who've experienced this before, who've gone through this? We ask patients to navigate this themselves. How can we empower patient navigators, connect those systems together? That is a big gap that we kind of just discussed. And then the affordability, I think, in a way, as these become more available and more accessible, and the knowledge about them grows, and we become, as a community, more cohesive in the way we process these therapies and manufacture them, the cost of goods can go down and the market of access increases. It becomes more affordable. So, really when it comes down to what the patient experiences, they're not seeing all the logistics play behind the scenes, the manufacturing slots, who doesn't have education around these cell therapies. They're seeing the impact and pain it's felt. And they're trying to turn to answers, and answers that currently our ecosystem doesn't yet provide very fully. So that's what I'm looking at, and in our case, we're creating a solution. Part of the solution is a decentralized apheresis machine. It's a bus that can go to different communities and help create authorized treatment centers, hopefully share knowledge, and hopefully lower the cost of access as well. So.
Yeah. And thanks, Adrian. And even, when I first saw your efforts to get the bus out there, I said even from a marketing perspective and seeing the Spanish language on it, it is, somebody will ask what that is, and that's an opportunity to educate on advanced therapies in the community. So even if we don't have collections happening yet, the bus is out here, we can go check it out. And I know in our discussion just a little bit ago, we talked about these access, logistical barriers that we all hear, but Dr. Saeed shared a very eloquent email with me, since we didn't get to prep together, about some of the things that we don't see in the logistics and access side from a barrier perspective. So would you mind chiming in and sharing?
So the most important part for in my understanding is building the trust with the patients and making sure the patient understand the whole journey, and making understand what we are trying to treat, what toxicity he can have, and making sure the after treatment what kind of care they can get. Making those pathways is important, and basically building the trust between the patient and clinician before starting the treatment is very important for my understanding and from our experience. If you make sure you tell the truth, or you make sure what all the toxicities, what are all the barriers, and how long the treatment lasts, and what happens after the treatment, who will take care. Some patients may not have caregivers. For example, elderly patients, difficult may have some care. So these things upfront we discuss with patients. Making the trust is really important in my understanding.
Yeah. And I think we started from that top down. How does a developer start thinking about this? What other support systems are there? Even when we approve drugs, there's access. But getting into Rob's world, and very fortunate to have a patient-driven CSO here, one that I've worked on some of these problems with directly. And one of the problems that Rob and I spoke about a lot is, despite all of this, there was also a scientific way to understand who could benefit most. And it's not necessarily an easy, fair system, and nor can we ever collect as much data as all of us would like. And then if we do, we still may be in trouble because we may have too much of it. But matching those patients and understanding who's a fit, that has been a problem on my mind forever. We may, at the beginning of CAR T, we put the sickest patients in, and then we had manufacturing failures. And then I literally sat between conversations of the head of manufacturing saying, "You're sending me bad starting material." But at the same time, it's not bad starting material, it's just a very sick patient. But seeing those conversations kept me up at night for a long time. And I know Rob has been working to solve some of those that I think we're at the point where we can discuss it. So Rob, when you think about that question, I know it's very loaded, but how do you think about who should receive and the roles the science you're looking at can play, and then how you connect that to everything that Amy's working on in a new clinical program?
Good Lord, where to start? So don't get me wrong. I am excited about cell therapeutics and the promise. But for me, and I'm a little hard-nosed, and I'm a little bit of a jerk. We're not there yet, and I'm aggravated to tears about it. And I'll pick on allogeneic, and I'll pick on autologous scenarios. He was citing the fact that at times we've seen manufacturing failures, and more importantly, we've seen clinical failures with autologous. And we, at times, don't ask a very simple question. So what we did with my group, and George had a lot of input on this, was we said, well, what is required to cure cancer? Not to slow it down, not to get a drug approval. That matters. But what do you have? What are the non-negotiables that an adaptive immune cell must have to have a chance of cure? It's not that we'll get there necessarily. It's to be in the game and to push the ball further down the field for the other more better people than me to get across the goal line and fix, okay? That's the point, is to be in the game and leave it all on the field. And so one of the critical questions is the starting material properties. So you got a patient that presents with AML, you put them through CHOP, and then after they've done quote unquote a washout of the CHOP therapy, several weeks to a month or two later, you harvest the cells to make the CAR construct. So CHOP causes, beyond 12 months, long-term immune function deficit lesions. So one of the questions I got in trouble for a long time ago is, why don't y'all collect the cells before you give them the therapy? And bank them, because you pretty much know about 80% confidence or higher now, you know what, you're going to fail because of your stage and the markers you've got. You're going to be a CAR T candidate, but we got to put you through standard of care first. So now I'm going to blast you with radiation, blast you with cytopenic therapies for 3 to 6 months. You're going to fail, and then I'm going to collect your cells and make a CAR. Good grief. So we're aggravated about that, so we're actually looking at that. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope what we call a preemptive collection doesn't show any better benefit in terms of function, immune function, than a post-therapy. But we're going to find out. Instead of making excuses for why not to do it, we're going to look and find out. And why would you do that? If it goes to frontline therapy, that's going to be the default anyway. Ironically, if we can get a CAR T to frontline therapy, my suspicion is we're going to see better responses. Hello, why not start now? And the argument is, well, you don't want to pull a full leukopack. You don't need a full leukopack to make a CAR T product. So that excuse doesn't work. It's too expensive. Bullshit. I'm sorry. Nonsense. It's about $3,000 to collect, bank, and hold for a year. And a trial itself is $500 million in 7 years if you don't design it properly. So that's the one piece for sure. Another one is a futility assessment. Take that CAR T patient or take that autologous patient and assess their immune cell repertoire fitness, effector function, memory function. Can they proliferate? You can do that, by the way, real quick. And see whether or not they even have cells worth making a CAR construct and putting them through that meat grinder or not. And if not, there are other therapy options out there. Why is that important? It's not just important for the patient, but that's the number one reason. The second reason, hello, clinical drug developers out there, most clinical trials fail not because your therapy wouldn't have worked, it's because your trial design was crappy. You did not enroll the optimal intent to treat population. If you clean that up, you'd see a lot more successes and a lot stronger responses, i.e., this patient's cells aren't going to divide, or they're going to divide very poorly. We're going to have to do an expansion for 4 weeks, which leads to telomeric attrition and senescence, such that when we finally make the cells, they're going to work for a week inside the patient, and then they're going to die off. Things like that are common sense. This isn't rocket science. It's common sense. On the allogeneic side, not all healthy donors are created equal. We have a mountain of data, and I will wear people out if they want to come visit with me and see it, about the immune deficits or lack of potency or lack of effectiveness or lack of memory and the variance of that even in young healthy donors, never mind old coots like me. So there's so much stuff that we are not doing that's low-hanging fruit that it drives me crazy. Now, it's a very short road in my case, I'll admit that, but there's so much opportunity, which actually excites me and makes me optimistic for the future of cell therapy. Because there's a lot of fixing that we can do because of our urgency, because of the shareholders. We got to get to the clinic by such and such time. And this idea that we're being inefficient, I understand what you mean by that, but really, when I worked construction, residential construction for a carpenter, his rule was measure twice and cut once. You actually build the house faster if you take an extra 5, 10, 20 minutes. You actually have a better chance of cure and clinical success if you take an extra couple days to assess the product, the starting material, before you make the car. This is just common sense. And I'll shut up now.
Well, thanks, Rob. And, before, I'd like to get to Amy after this, but Dr. Saeed, I know, given the translational work that you do and bringing it to the patient, you have some thoughts around this as well. What are some of the things we can do to solve some of the things that Rob talks about, especially given, your unique position on the translational side?
Yeah, I agree with Rob. Before consolidation treatment, it's better to have some kind of a starting material frozen. But if that is not possible, at least to moving these therapies into the first line therapy, so to see better results, why not possible? That is another thing. Or otherwise, we can modify a little bit, like based on the patient cells, like CD3, how much CD3 they have, how much CD4, CD8 population they have, and do they need long manufacturing process. Sometimes you can modify the manufacturing process, what we do in Saudi Arabia now. So we don't need to expand the cells too much because they already gone through a lot of radiation, chemotherapy. So when you are collecting cells from a very sick patient, if there is no option, then you assess the cells as starting material and try to reduce the manufacturing time from weeks to maybe 3-4 days because you just need one dose. So that is one option. And other thing is before giving the therapy, these therapies is really important to understand the potency of the cells. Just not having a phenotype, it doesn't mean that your cancer will be cleared. You have to have a potency assay, proper potency assays to check those. Otherwise, you may not see the relapse in 7 days, but you might see the relapse after 3 months. So if you don't have your proper potency assays for the release product, that is going to be a difficult challenges. Other things I agree with Rob. Other things you can do is if autologous is not the option for that kind of patients, allogenic, off-the-shelf CAR T cells, or otherwise NK CAR T cells or macrophages, those other options. But this is the time we can explore more. As Rob said, there is a lot to be done here. We don't understand many things here. Why some patient respond differently, why other patients don't, because of the starting material, because of genetic makeup. And manufacturing is not strictly regulated, especially. If you have same car construct, but two products will differently give the results because of their exposure to cytokine, because of the expansion rate, because of the many things like glucose and lactate and pH, everything counts in that. Even 1 degree of temperature can change the whole scenario in the cell propagation. So that is my understanding at the moment. Thank you.
And thanks for sharing. And I know Amy is in a totally different world of gene therapy, but I think it's really interesting in this to see when you're developing a program and you hear all of this, and I know maybe the facts of the immune system and the cell therapy are new to you, but when you decide to go to the clinic and you have to make these decisions, where do you stop so you can start the trial? Like, there's a million of these questions and we could keep going forever, but where do you start?
First, I'd like to say I love the passion.
Oh, sorry.
I love it. I think
My bad.
that's what developing in advanced therapies is. High unmet need. These patients are looking for something, they don't have anything else. So we need that kind of passion. So for us, when we think about developing our clinical trials in gene therapy, we already know some of the biology in that our gene therapy is only going to work if we can rescue the rods and cones in the retina. So those patients that are too far advanced and don't have rods and cones that are maybe going to be rescued, we know we need to design the trial and exclude them for now because clinical trial design is really important. We need to have that trial that is successful in order to move forward. Doesn't mean that we don't want to study those patients if there may be some patients on the fringes that might respond, but we want to be in that sweet spot of where we know those patients are going to respond. So we've designed our inclusion-exclusion criteria to find those patients that sit where we think they're going to have the most benefit. On top of that, there are a couple of other gene therapies in our space that have failed because of trial design. Not because I don't think that they would have been successful, but because the companies decided to not move forward because they didn't meet their primary endpoints. We have the benefit of learning from that, so that helped inform our clinical trials and choosing the right patients. And then, the key is to have a successful trial and hopefully submit to regulatory authorities, and then you can study those other patient populations afterwards. And we only have so much money, so we've got to start with the patients where we think they're going to have the most benefit.
Yeah, and I think that's the hardest part is we can't be perfect, and then the next company or the next trial may step in and learn something, and Rob may contribute some ideas and thoughts, and they can't stop that trial if it's efficacious, but someone else can start a new one. And I think Abigail, when it points to rare, and we talk about not having any other options, but when one of these diseases that we work with patients on starts to get some traction, how do you educate patients and build trust when there's so much going on. And almost, I'm on the patient side myself. I dare not even let this part of my brain come out when I'm talking to Betsy and other CAR T patients that I have here, because she will want to know everything. So we'll sick Rob on her for a weekend of fishing on his boat. But how do you do that from, in your experience, to keep up when the science is moving so fast and keeping patients educated enough to move forward?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And in the rare disease space, we see this a lot. We see that being very dynamic, things are changing post-commercialization, and that level of education and transparency to the patients is absolutely critical. And we talked a little bit about trust earlier, and I've actually heard quite a theme at this conference about trust in multiple different avenues. And it's so important to really set that stage because it is the foundation of a patient relationship. And so how do we do that though? Because it seems like, oh, you will trust me with your care. And that's not really, it's not that easy. So we talked a little bit about spending time with the patient and being transparent, but the other key that needs to be considered is you have to have the framework set up so that you're giving them a consistent, familiar guide throughout all these milestones. And you're thinking, well, it's maybe a one-time dose, but it's not one-time care, right? Because you need to monitor these advanced therapeutics in the long term. And when you establish that trust at the foundation, what you're doing is you're setting up that relationship so that these patients start to know, okay, I know why this person's calling me, I know who's calling me, I know when they're calling me, and you're adding a little bit of predictability into that framework, and they want to engage. They understand that as we learn more about them, that now we're going to build that into the model to be more intelligent, and we're going to help the next patient. And then that one's going to help the next patient. And so you have this continual learning CGT ecosystem, and it translates the same way in the rare disease space. And so I think that's very important. We actually did a small study last year at our organization where we looked at familiarity, so consistency of the same team member speaking to patients, and we looked at patient engagement. And when you have a consistent team member speaking to the same individual, that patient engagement accelerates. And what that does is it gives them that platform and that comfort to be able to say, hey, I'm having these side effects. And so now you're learning these early safety signals that might otherwise go unseen. And that's so critical when you have a space, especially with CGT, that's so dynamic and so changing. And so how I look at it is that this trust that you're creating on the front end, it's really a clinical safeguard. So it's so important to invest that time up front because of the long-term benefits.
Yeah, and I think rivaling, not by design, our foundation's mission, expanding to all advanced therapies, we owe it as a foundation to honor the pediatric CAR T patients and CAR T in general. So we can go all the way up to how do we design, how do we treat people. That is universal, and that's what we see. But then on the other end, when we have CAR T, which we're talking about 5th and 6th generation, but we need to deliver the 1st generation, there is a trust that can be built that I know Adrian speaks about that can't always be done at the hospital if we're going to scale it to the other 80%. So how do you look at trust, Adrian, in the way you fit into that ecosystem to deliver to disadvantaged populations, community hospitals? How does it work when you're not their healthcare provider, but you're part of the supply chain, so to speak?
Yeah, I think, well, one thing is that, and just to kind of give some background, my organization stemmed out of a blood bank. So we were used to going out to the community and asking for help, from the community, but also demystifying the experience and making it less scary. There's a needle involved, it's scary usually. And people, to willingly give their time, you have to develop a set of tools to reach out to the community, educate them, bring them along. And I think there's parallels here because we're asking for a blood donation essentially at the very beginning of some of these therapies, and a lot of follow-up care, a lot of things that are involved, longitudinal studies that will follow these patients over the many, many years. So I completely agree with Abigail. There needs to be some continuity. And many populations, they don't trust research. They don't trust maybe medical establishments. Going into a hospital is very scary. So when we think about building an ecosystem and addressing some of these systemic challenges, organizations like ourselves, which serve the community naturally, and can reach out and touch many parts of the community, whether it be healthcare providers, patients, other parts of the provider network, we can do it in a way that is less scary because we're outside of the hospital, where we can educate and inform the community around what these therapies can do, what the impact is that they can make, what happens to the cells, how they can. We talk about like our bus is a school bus for cells. The cells get picked up and they go to a training camp and then they get back to the patient. Much less scary than something that might be otherwise very hard to understand. So I think doing that, packaging what we do in a way that is reachable is part of the equation. Helping to educate providers is part of the equation, so they can educate as well. They can be part of that. Many clinicians, they're not sure how to navigate these therapies. They don't know how they really work. They're scared to send their patient away to something that they don't know. There is a gap there that we can address. And pharmaceutical companies are only able to say so much about what their drug can do, about what these therapies are like to go through. That's where I think organizations like ours, and actually yours, George, come into the equation, that we are service organization to the industry at large, and we can communicate and act as a liaison in a different way than maybe some of the actual providers can or the pharmaceutical manufacturers can.
Yeah. I think it's a great point. You know, where I sit at the foundation, I have a very easy job. I can just yell at everybody to do more every day. But I want to dig in and do more too. So we're trying to find the things that we do, but in the interim, I just get to yell that you're not doing enough. And Rob's kind of on that team as well. But Rob also comes from a blood banking world despite his enormous scientific knowledge. So for Rob, you don't get to interact with patients. You're in the CDMO connected to a blood bank. What is your role in building trust with patients besides yelling at us?
Well, I do like yelling, obviously. No, look, the patient-doctor relationship is a contract. I'm dying. Convince me why I should trust you with my life. Okay? There's an educational process there. Obviously, educating the patients in outreach systems and plans and objectives like that are critical. And with Blood Bank, we do that. The other side of the education process is the primary care, the physician network and the care network itself. It's still a little surprising at how unfamiliar some doctors are with the alternatives that are available now. And it's not their fault. They're busy, very busy. So having a more organized approach to getting everybody up to speed about the options that they can offer to their patients would be critical to that. As far as myself personally and the folks I have the privilege of working with and the company that I'm in, the simple mind, it's really simple-minded for me, George. Every morning, the number that pops into my head is 13,000. That's how many people will die this week of cancer in the U.S. Nothing makes it more urgent. So anything we do to delay by 1 week or 1 month or 1 hour has an impact. So efficiency is important, but as I tell my folks, don't work hard, work good. Do the right kind of work. You know, and I mean, we're now at the new frontier of CAR T gene therapy. In other words, we're going to give in vivo CAR T. And I asked some of the companies when I was at the Spain meeting, are y'all doing anything to look at the immune status of those patients before you give them the induction therapy to convert their immune system to CAR T positivity? And they said, well, we hadn't thought of that. How do you know they have anything worth gene editing if you haven't at least taken a peek? And what's the timing of that? How soon after failure of other therapy do you start this to assure a better product? You know, you can't go prospectively, I wish, but you can't. So there's some common sense things like that. So the patient relationship for us is more of we're part of the army. And we all are. Everybody in this room, I applaud you. We're here to fight the disease, okay? So the relationship is not that I get to talk directly to patients, although we do bring patients in and it lights up the team. We'll bring folks in that have been beneficiaries of adaptive immunotherapies, and good God, it's a day changer for it's like, I hate to say it, it's remarkable how the folks, because to us it's a job, and we're not special, we're not. What we do as a group is special, but each individual, we're just regular people doing our job. But when you see a patient and they say thank you, that really hits. And then the folks go back to work even more infused, not just to work hard, but to work good, to be critical thinkers. Like we'll see a report about a trial where nothing's ever worked and they get a 60% overall response rate. And I counsel my folks to say, yes, you should be proud of that, work for that company, but you should also automatically ask the question, what about the other 40%?
Yeah.
That's the patient that still has a problem, you know. When we get to 100%, I hope we get put out of business. I hope we all got to go fishing or something, me in particular. But that's the patient relationship we have.
And then, thanks, Rob. And I know you always have that piece. Rob has taught my children directly about CAR T therapy at the San Diego Blood Bank, and they still talk about it. So we know, despite all of that science, there's such a human part to everything that we do here. And, you know, Dr. Saeed, when you think about your work, and you think about decentralizing and building the scale, but also having that connection, how does that all fit together, and what's the unique view that you have, right? We want to scale this as big as we can, but we do need to stay in touch and care for patients. How do we do that?
Yeah, so in my opinion, you know, patient drives the innovation, and decentralize. The main important part is, you know, access to patient is really important because these cancers are very quickly they change. You don't have much time. In our institute, what we are trying to do is we are trying to produce cells near the point of care. When we need it, we use it. So that's kind of approach. So I have 3 experience. 2 in UK, where we given the patients cells off the shelf CAR T cells. I was a part of a great team, Professor Wasim Qasim, and a 1-year-old girl dying with DLL. She has no option. And we just produce off the shelf, first in world with talent. We haven't even tested them on the animals and anything. Just they were sitting in the liquid nitrogen tank. But the trust between the patient and patient family, the parents said, we will take it. We will use it. Anyway, my daughter is going to die in 3 months. We will take it. We approached MHRA immediately. We did all our best, and I was passionate about that, work, what we have done in our team, in Professor Wasim Qasim. And now the child is survived just 1 vial of 10 million cells off the shelf, and the cancer was like a magic bullet, gone in 24 days. So that's very, very important to have this kind of relationship with the patients and telling them the truth, what we have done, how it can, change your life. And second part is Alessia, the 13-year-old girl for CD7 TLL CAR T cells, base edited. We were fortunate to produce this during the COVID in UCL, with Professor Wasim Qasim team, and I was very fortunate to be a lead scientist in that. And the girl has no option, okay, Alessia. So we gave that cells, base edited cells. The technology was introduced by David Liu's lab just 18 months before, and we were the first people to take to clinic within 18 months. Despite of having COVID, we had a priority to manufacture this and make the trust between the patient, family, and patient, give that. And the patient was so brave that she said, I will take it. Even though I'm the first in the world to take it, I will take it, and I will make this as a proof for other patients. And now she is cancer-free from past 4 years now, Alessia, 13 years. And same thing happened in Riyadh. So we had one patient, 29-year-old mother. She has no options, multiple relapses, even commercial CAR T relapse. So we approached her. We said we have this in-house CAR T cells, and we made her trust, talking to her and explaining simple language, layman language, how it works. Because some people, in communities, it's difficult to explain them. You're using HIV virus to modify your cells. They get scared sometimes. But we explain them what is happening, and we managed to treat this lady who has no options after 6 lines of therapies fail. And we produce the cells for a much, much lower price, $15,000 to $20,000. And now she is cancer-free approximately 6 months now. Yeah. So this is important to give them, what they need to understand basically in the simple language, simple terms, and very transparent what we are doing. That's important in my opinion.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing those direct stories. As data-driven as we all want to be, and I want to be, we do need a story to get people behind us. It's a Daniel Kahneman quote that I steal all the time. People don't actually make decisions with data. They need a story. But then it starts there. I think the story about CAR T so far, and having been on the donor world myself, it's not necessarily less expensive to do more of it, which breaks the mold of so much of business theory. But innovation comes in and helps. And I think having such a disparate group on here and in this room helps us all understand. And then, I'm not a Patriots fan, I'm a Giants fan from Boston, but Bill Belichick's do your job we have to think about, because I can wander and try to do everybody's job at any time. But I think we just have a few minutes, but when we think about what our job is, and maybe we'll start at the end and ask each one of our panelists, what is the single thing that you would change, starting with Abigail, to make it feel doable for the average patient, not just the ideal one?
I would say radical transparency throughout the whole CGT journey for these patients. They deserve an honest and clear roadmap of what that journey looks like from day one, before they even start. And I think what that allows is it helps to eliminate surprises. Surprises are not welcomed in healthcare, ever, or rarely maybe. And it also allows the opportunity for trust to develop. So I would say transparency.
And just a quick follow-up from me, having done it many times in my life. If I say I want to hear feedback and then I don't like that feedback or the info, what happens then for patients?
I think they have the opportunity to make a decision. Whereas if they're already down that road and they started down this path and they're surprised by it, then what do you do? Might be too late, too far down. Financial commitments and, travel. They might have had to move to get closer to a center of excellence. So it's better to know up front and plan ahead for what's to be expected.
Mm-hmm. I think that speaks to the trust that we talk about. The more trust, then we can be more transparent.
Exactly.
Adrian?
I think if I were to sum it up in a single word, probably, it's transformation. I know that's a lot. We all have a part to play. Each of you in this room, you're working on some part of the ecosystem. And let's face it, these therapies the science is incredibly impressive. I mean, what Syed just shared, that someone at the very brink of no other option and nothing worked. It actually worked. And we hear that story time and time again, and these therapies are going out to autoimmune, solid tumor indications, the in vivo therapies that are coming on the horizon. It's just incredibly promising, but we do need to transform the ecosystem together in order for these therapies to reach the people who will be able to benefit from them. I worry that we will see the numbers increase of patients who are treated, but we will see the ratio of people who are able to access those treatments based upon the number of eligible patients. The fraction will be smaller if we don't transform the industry. So more patients treated doesn't mean more percentage of patients who are eligible get treated. So we have to really think about what each of us can do, whether it's lowering the cost of vectors, it's creating accessibility options, it's creating knowledge, thinking about broader communities that haven't been reachable before and how we can access that. That's transformation, and it's imparted by all of us in this room. So that was my wish.
Yeah, and I think you bring a very important point. I joined the steering committee of this CAR T Vision 2030, and when I initially read the mission of doubling the number of patients treated in 5 years, I was like, that is nothing. then I reread it, I think after my first interview about it, so I'm somewhere incorrect. It was actually doubling the percentage of patients treated. So rather than the 20%, it's getting to 40. And that really stuck in my head, A, because I was completely wrong, and B, because that's a significant amount of difference than just doubling the number in 5 years. So I think, transparency, transformation, and then Dr. Saeed, what do you see as something doable to make this successful? I know so many thoughts you have about getting this to everyone.
So the most importantly, I would suggest, in my opinion, two important points I will mention. Affordable therapies, the price, I don't know. I'm an academic, so how pharma justify this price, I don't know. 2.5 million for gene therapy. So it should be affordable because we have number of patients who doesn't have this CAR-T or gene therapy access. And other important thing is less toxic. Okay, we have seen a lot of toxicity with these CAR-T cells. Don't get me wrong, they clean the cancer definitely, but some 5 to 10% patients or 15% patient in some geographical populations, they go to severe toxicity. I'm not talking about just CRS, I'm talking about ICANS, neurological toxicities. So we have to make these therapies less toxic by properly, understanding the expression of antigen, making the off-rate, slow on-rate CAR-T cells, or maybe dual CAR, something like that. So that's very important. Otherwise, what we are treating is patient, not the disease. So it ultimately impacts the patients when he goes to. I don't want the patient to end up in ICU, having a 1 million Saudi Riyal therapy, and still gone to the ICU, and they're already immunocompromised. They might have some secondary infections. So we have to make sure that the toxicity is as low as possible with these therapies.
Yeah. And Amy, with a lot of talk on the cell side, you're on the gene side, but I think universally everyone has said it still comes down to a patient. So from that patient perspective, what allows it to be doable? And specifically maybe in your gene therapy side, what's different? How does that become accessible to the populations you're working on now?
Yeah, reducing the burden for the patients. Like I said, this is a surgical procedure. So in our clinical trials, we try to minimize the burden just to participate in the trial. We have a mobile vision clinic, so they don't have to travel if they wouldn't qualify for the trials. How do we fly the patients to the surgical centers, white glove service with a caregiver because these patients are losing their vision? And how do we carry that forward? And hopefully when we can bring this to commercialization, if we're successful, is really how do we minimize the burden for the patients so they can get what they need from a payer perspective, getting it paid from a location perspective and being treated and understanding through transparency what their risks and benefits are going to be. So a lot of the same things, just in a little bit different flavor,
Sure.
Reducing the burden and also doing more trials in those other populations beyond our clinical trials. So who else could benefit from this gene therapy?
Yeah. And thanks. And then I think we just have a minute left. Rob?
Yeah. Critical thinking. I mean, it's a worn-out phrase, but we really need that. I.e., you see a 60% response rate in the clinic. That's great, but what you should immediately be thinking is, why didn't the other 40% respond? Because when in grade school, if I made a 60 on a test, that was an F. Okay, so give yourself some personal perspective and think critically about what you're doing. Pat yourself on the back for the successes and the progress you make, but also step back and keep your feet on the ground, okay? And I'll give you a material example of that. And I'm hoping it's changed in the last couple of years, but a couple of years ago, when they look at the API content of a CAR-T product, which are the subset of CAR-T cells, so you have 100% CAR-T positive T cells that you infuse into the patient. When they actually look systematically at what percentage of those cells actually can kill multiple times, which is considered the active pharmaceutical ingredient in a CAR-T preparation, the best case scenario was 23%. Okay, well, so just give a larger dose. The other CAR T cells still go through activation non-specifically without killing that can lead to cytokine storm. You also have to give a larger dose, which means your cost of goods is doubled. You also have added a competitive inhibitor that occludes the ability of the API to bind. If we could just double the API content from 25% to 50 or 60 or 70%, what would that do to cost, safety, and most importantly for the patient, potency and efficacy? That exists right now as a problem. It's quite fixable, I think, although it's not trivial. So critical thinking. Oh, look, it worked. We cured somebody. What about the other 10 people that didn't get cured? Not that the cure isn't wonderful and gratifying, but for God's sakes, look to those that are still standing out in the cold in the night, waiting for you to help them. And look at yourself then, and look at what you did and say, what could I have done better? What's the next thing I need to do to get to that point such that there are no more people standing out in the dark? You know, and be self-critical, not in a I suck way, but in a I need to get better way. And I'll shut up.
You know, and thanks, Rob, because it does point to exactly what we're talking about with Adrian at the round table before this, and what the foundation lives for is you don't need to be identical to someone to help them. It doesn't need to be the same disease, socioeconomic status, gender. None of that matters. You can just help. We can do our scientific job, but we can just help people out there and spread the word. And I thank all of you for being here. Everyone in the audience, I don't know if we have any time. Somebody, no, we're good. But if there's any questions, we can meet the panelists before the next 5 minutes when the next session happens.
Really?
Thank you all.
No, I'm joking.